I knew that something was missing. And it took a bit of time to fully admit that to myself because it was easier not to.
I'm Heather Grish, and this is the Wisdom of the Body podcast. This podcast explores the idea of body intelligence as the real key to learning the knowledge of life, or what we call Ayurveda in the ancient language of Sanskrit. We do that by connecting with today's creative leaders and experts who will help you listen to your body, trust your gut, and live in deeper harmony with nature. Come join me as we unlock the golden door to clear, direct perception and become very deep listeners. You can find the Wisdom of the Body podcast on Apple, Spotify, and Stitcher. You can also follow us by joining my email at heathergrish.com or on Instagram at heathergrish. I know you're going to love this podcast, so take a second right now to subscribe. It's assumed that the number of Americans living with digestive issues is quite high. Whether it's gas, bloating, diarrhea, or heartburn, these things are just not signs of good health. In one study conducted pre-pandemic, that number was estimated to be at 61%. And in another study, it was actually 74% of Americans living with digestive issues. Either way, it's a lot of people. But today's podcast is not about digestive issues. It's about aligning your work, your actions, and your life to your values. My guest today empowers conscious entrepreneurs to thrive with purpose, and that, she thinks, together we can change the world through conscious entrepreneurship. She's a board member, advisor to startups and charities, a serial entrepreneur, a certified transformation coach, and an expert brand strategist. She's also previously consulted with 100 top fashion lifestyle brands globally on strategy and marketing before aligning her work and her values. The reason that this is possibly related to digestive issues is that sometimes what's going on around you simply isn't aligned with your values, and you will feel this in your body. And if you do nothing, your body will suffer. If you listen to it, it might feel scary at first. Well, because the unknown always is. But your body will be really happy that you made a change in the long run. You're listening to the Wisdom of the Body. Today, I'm here with Nikki Trott, who is the founder of Conscious Accelerator and the host of the Going Conscious podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today, Nikki.
Thank you for having me, Heather. I'm so happy to be here with you.
Oh my God, I love hearing your voice. I seem to have had a lot of British people on my podcast. I think you're the fifth one.
Nice. We've got good accents.
Yes, I think I have a bias toward Brits somehow because we're episode 32. That's a large amount of Brits for a podcast so far.
Well, I have lots of Americans on mine, so it goes both ways.
Okay, so Nikki, I'm really excited to dive into your story and the topics that we're going to talk about today. You know, this idea of aligning our work to our values and the coaching and consulting work that you've been doing with people after really going on quite a journey. Nikki, you worked in the fashion industry for a really long time, and you had a pretty successful career working for all these fashion brands, and then you kind of left it all behind. Why did you do that?
Yes, well, it was a process, but it felt like it all happened at once at the same time. I was working for many fashion brands around the world, consulting them. I had my own successful company, and I had what I had been told success was. So the kind of external success, if you like. My company was doing really well, working with famous brands. The money was great. I had lots of freedom, and it still didn't feel fulfilling. And that was quite a hard thing to admit, especially when people from the outside were telling me how successful I was. But I knew that something was missing. And it took a bit of time to fully admit that to myself because it was easier not to. But over time, it became a niggling feeling that there was a gap, that there was an emptiness around my work. And this was happening at the same time as my spiritual journey, where I had become fully vegan. I had started meditating and reading a lot of spiritual books and really developing my connection with my body as well, which was a key part of that. And through that whole process that I went through very deeply in myself personally, it made more and more obvious the gap between my personal values and the impact that my work was making on the world. And I could no longer deny that working for big fashion brands was helping pillage the planet and also deepen the insecurity and lacking that people feel through the way that those products are marketed. And I was part of that machine, and there were beautiful parts of it too, creativity and art. And, I made friends for life, and were also people in the industry making incredible innovations around sustainability. But essentially, everything I was doing felt more and more frivolous. And I realized that I was just part of a machine that did not serve me or anybody else on the planet. And so it did take some courage, but I realized I needed to move away from that. And if I stayed in this business, I would not be satisfied. So it was completely my choice and up to me to move. And I listened to my intuition, actually. I allowed my intuition to fully guide me, and it told me to train as a transformation coach. And I'd always been interested in coaching and helping people, but I had also been told, successful people aren't coaches, they have coaches. Everyone can be a coach, it's not a real job. I had this kind of perception and had snubbed coaching before. But now I felt, actually, I knew I wanted to train as a coach, not that it would be my end goal. That wouldn't be my end thing. I knew that too, but that it was part of my journey. And so I started to really surrender and trained as a coach and started coaching incredible visionary entrepreneurs who are aligned with my values. So people who want to make a positive impact on the world with whatever they do with their business. And that led me to then realize that, of course, all of that experience I have from before of running businesses and working with brands and doing strategies was super important to all of these incredible conscious impact entrepreneurs who were coming to work with me. And that's how I then brought together the coaching work around the internal, the mindset and the purpose and those deep factors with the, what I call the external work around the brand strategy and business strategy, to create a holistic approach for conscious entrepreneurs and help guide them to success so they can thrive and make the positive impact that they're meant to make and cause a ripple effect.
You mentioned that there were some books that influenced you in your spiritual journey. What were those books?
Ooh, lots. But the first one was The Power of Now, and by Eckhart Tolle. And that was so important because I was leaving this crazy life behind of flying to New York all the time from London, always on planes, going around everywhere, burning the candle at both ends. I was always out somewhere at an event, meeting people, working. And I was just running all the time nonstop. And when I left London, because at the same time as leaving my job for an agency, I also left a long relationship and became fully vegan, like I said, and moved to Berlin. And I made lots of life changes at the same time, like I know you did too, Heather, in your journey. And during that process, that's when I just arrived in Berlin and for the first time really felt that I had time. And I read The Power of Now, which really helped me to connect and start to change my mindset quite radically. I also love A New Earth by Eckhart Tolle as well, and The Surrender Experiment by Michael Singer. I could go on, but those were some important ones. But other important things to me were podcasts. I listened to a lot of Under the Skin by Russell Brand and just felt like I had all of these like-minded, incredible people in my pocket. Wherever I went, I could really learn from them. And also I started practicing Pilates a lot, which helped me to really connect with my body and integrate myself and my body, because before that, my body had been like a shell that I just took around and pushed and exploited and dressed up. And it had never really felt like it was part of this being that I am. It was just the outer shell, and you could manipulate it and trick it. And so connecting with my body again, for me, that was through Pilates. And actually, to be honest, even before that, I just gave up public transport and started walking everywhere. And if I had an appointment, I'd walk for an hour or walk for half an hour and just using my own body and really connecting. This while listening to the podcasts, this really changed my life. It changed my mindset because I think it allowed me the time to process all of the new inputs that I was absorbing at that time. So that was a really important part of the full picture.
Yeah, I read A New Earth. I actually haven't read The Power of Now, but apparently that book was published by the same publisher that I published my book with, because I walked in the back room and I saw all the books that they published, and apparently he was one of their big sellers. Yeah. So, Nikki, this is really, really big what you've been through. And also because it's just such a huge industry. And I really have not thought a lot about, how the fashion industry has affected the planet. I mean, I remember hearing things about sweatshops and things like that. And then more recently, I've heard about the use of plastics and clothing, but it sounds like the fashion industry has a huge impact on the environment. Would you say that?
Oh my gosh, absolutely. I don't have any data to hand right now, but any data that you look at, I mean, the actual scale is, of course, unknown, but it's estimated. It's incredible. It's not one of the largest contributors to pollution of our planet and destruction of our environment from so many different levels. And really, for me, the most troubling part is that the whole industry is built on getting faster and faster. And it's built on this sense of newness. And, you might not be happy, but if you buy this, then you're going to be happy. And trying to encourage people to feel a sense of lack in themselves with these external items, like treat yourself, you deserve it. Buy this thing you don't need. That's not treating yourself, actually. And it took me a long time of unraveling to fully understand that. And there's nothing wrong with needing something for whatever reason, or just really wanting and loving a piece of art and respecting it and appreciating it and using it until it can't be used anymore. But this sense of constantly buying new things every week to try to feel better on the inside, which obviously works only for the fashion companies because it means that you buy again because it didn't work for you. It's just causing this insatiable hunger, which is driving so much destruction.
Yeah, apparently I actually had just heard of this term called planned obsolescence, which is not in fashion, but in, I guess, tech, when they make, iPhones. Like, you essentially create something so that people want new functionality in a year or two or something, so you can keep selling new ones, which is a little different, but it kind of like all falls under this idea of like how we make things and how we motivate people to want them and to buy them and to give us their money for them. And then also what happens to things when they get thrown away and unused anymore. And I'm not really super familiar. It's something I want to learn more about, this idea of like ethical consumerism and conscious consumerism. What do those terms mean to most people in the work that you've done, that you found?
It's a big question, but if you take it to its simplest form, conscious consumption is being conscious about what you consume. And that's harder than it sounds, because most of us have spent decades being driven by emotional factors linked to advertising, linked to our sense of self-worth, linked to society and the people around us, and how we perceive material items can help change our positioning in society. And we're doing a lot of these things and making a lot of purchases without being truly conscious of why we really are purchasing that item and what we really want it for, and if it's really worth what it took. Often we don't know what went into it. We don't really know why we're buying it. We're just hoping we might feel better. And then it ends up at the bottom of a pile with the label still on until it gets given away in a few years' time. So conscious consumerism is being really aware of all of the different elements around a purchase, which is impossible in our current system. Unless you literally grow the materials yourself in your garden and weave them into cloth and create your garments, you don't know. You can't have full transparency. But consumers are more and more demanding that transparency and choosing brands which do put their values at the core of what they do. And that's driving the success of brands. So if we see like the success of Patagonia, for example, an outerwear brand that's got such high brand equity because their purpose and values are at the core. So this is how things are changing. But there are also, of course, many, many big companies stuck in the old ways. But I don't believe that they will survive unless they understand the changes that they need to make.
If you want to create a more receptive body, free from toxins, inflammation, and metabolic issues, would it be crazy for you to explore booking an Ayurvedic consultation with me? There's probably never been a more perfect time to do it. Every day you wait matters when it comes to your health. So if you're ready to get your body back in balance, I'll give you a 30-day plan to get you started. Go to heathergrish.com to book a consultation. That's Heather, GRZYCH.com. You mentioned that you've been vegan for a while, and I remember hearing last year that Starbucks announced that they were going to go dairy-free. And I immediately was like, oh, when? Like, how long is it going to take? And apparently they said 2030, which to me feels like a really long way away for the amount of people who seem to be ready for this now. But I guess, you have to build the whole infrastructure to support the growth and consumption of all this extra almond and coconut milk that'll be consumed instead of cow milk, perhaps. I really love this move, but I also find it very ironic considering that, to me, coffee, the idea of like drinking coffee and people waking up in the morning and having to energize themselves with coffee and like speed things up. I just find it very ironic that this good move for the planet is being done by an organization that's like pumping people up to work harder, to work faster. What do you feel about coffee? Do you feel like coffee has anything to do with this? I do, but maybe I'm biased.
Interesting question. No one has ever asked me that question like that. Yeah, I do. Quitting coffee and alcohol were also really important parts of my spiritual development, of connecting more deeply with myself, because they are crutches that we use that are so normalized in our society. And they're different, of course. And your question was about coffee, but there's so many similarities between them where we feel that it's okay to use these drugs. And sometimes it is in a small way, but there's so much addiction. I can't start my day without, or I can't go for dinner without. And when we're addicted, we're no longer able to be conscious because we're no longer able to make decisions that are really informed. We're more driven by a desperation. And I had that with coffee, definitely. I used to drink coffee. I had one coffee every day. It was my ritual. I enjoyed having that little moment for myself, popping out of the office into the sunshine and buying that delicious, very, very expensive coffee. And my husband always says, the problem isn't the coffee cups, it's the coffee. When there's all of this kind of, recycled cups. And it's so true. I mean, there's, of course, many issues in the industry itself. And coffee doesn't grow in Europe. So not sure if it grows in South America. I'm sure it does, but probably not in North and Mid America.
Just so Hawaii. Hawaii has some.
Yeah.
But I don't live in Hawaii.
Yeah. So why is there coffee everywhere on every corner when it doesn't even grow there? And yes, I agree with you. I think any addiction takes you away from yourself and it disconnects you from your body. And I think maybe that's triggering people listening, thinking I'm not addicted, but I felt the same. And I never craved a coffee. If I missed a day without a coffee, it wasn't even a big deal for me. It didn't matter. It just wasn't something that I really thought about. But when I stopped coffee because of a diet I went on for my stomach bacteria, different story, but I suddenly stopped coffee, I had some quite mild feverish symptoms for a week. And for a different reason, I also had stopped coffee a couple of years before and had the same symptoms, and that I thought I was sick. And that's how I realized that I wasn't sick at all. It was withdrawal symptoms. So although I felt absolutely confident that I was not reliant on that, there was something physical happening. And that showed me that I didn't want to go back. And, when I stopped drinking alcohol, I didn't notice anything physical. I was just drinking alcohol socially on weekends, and I was drinking less and less as well over the years. But I still had feelings before that I wouldn't go to a free drinks party and not have a free drink of alcohol, or I wouldn't go for dinner where every person's drinking wine and be the one person not drinking wine. And that to me is addiction, because it's not making your own decision in that moment based on your needs and your values. It's just being part of unconsciousness. And so, yeah, it's a really interesting question. I do think that coffee definitely takes us away from ourselves and pushes us into that machine that's more about doing than being.
More about doing than being. Nikki, you've done a lot of interviews with people who've aligned their work to their values. And, you've talked to a lot of people about this topic. Can you give some examples of some of the changes that other people have made in their business after becoming more aware of the impact that they're having on the planet?
Wow. Yes. I mean, I've interviewed people who have gone through incredibly big changes, like Bandana, who was the chief executive of Vogue India and is now a sustainability activist in Bali. Or, I've interviewed people who have gone from really corporate jobs, like yourself, from a corporate world into healing modalities and serving people. There have been so many big changes, and each of them unique, but each of them with many silver threads that run through them. And, I think that there's so much happening now more and more, especially after the last year and a half, where people have often had a bit more time to jump off that hamster wheel and look internally and ask some difficult questions. And more I'm seeing incredible, talented people questioning the way they're living and working and looking for something more meaningful to them, looking for a purpose greater than themselves.
What are some of the big challenges that you've seen people come up with on this journey? Because it's a huge deal to make a shift like that. And I know I felt them, but what are some of the challenges that you've seen people have along the way when they don't feel aligned with their current career or their current company or their current industry? Do you think it's harder to leave when a person is successful, or do you think it's easier to leave then?
I think it's harder because you have a warped idea that you have something to lose. And the longer you work at something and the more you excel in that, the more you feel you would be turning your back on everything you put in, and all of that pain would be a waste of time. And that's something I see quite often during the process, because it definitely takes time to realize that actually the pain would be staying and not allowing yourself to evolve in the direction you want to. But there's definitely a sense of, what am I throwing away? And that's, I think, rooted in the fear of change that every human has to some extent, I believe. I'd be interested to meet one if there was someone who had absolutely no fear of change whatsoever. I personally do thrive from change. I am one of those weird people who loves it, but there's still fear of change sometimes. And I think everybody experiences that to a greater or lesser extent. And that's something which also really holds us back, because we feel that we just don't have a guarantee for what's coming. And it takes an incredible amount of courage and an incredible amount of trust in yourself as well. And also, the need for external validation is something that I think everybody has to work through in this process. I certainly did. I didn't think that I was really relying on external validation until I was making changes and realized that I have this huge global network of people in the fashion industry. And by the way, some of them are doing incredible, innovative work around sustainability, and it's absolutely amazing. But most of them were in the old world, in the old paradigm mindset still. Although it has been interesting seeing more and more amazing people from that old world reaching out to me who have gone through their own journeys and are now looking at creating conscious businesses. It's really incredible to see. But in general, I also worried, what are they going to think? Are they going to think I've gone mad? They're going to think I'm crazy, that I've left this successful business and now I'm doing this, because people don't like it when your actions question and show them their own problems. And that's something I noticed mostly actually by stopping alcohol. The people who really had an issue with me not drinking are the people who have an issue with drinking and don't want to see it. And I think it's the same. The people who really have an issue with you changing your life and going down a conscious path are the people who deep down feel very conflicted somewhere and they're not able to face it yet. So everybody has their own journey. Not everybody will even go through that journey in this lifetime, right? But that's something that we all have to work through if we want to really align with who we truly are.
Nikki, your podcast is called Going Conscious, and it's great. And how do you recommend someone goes conscious? Like, obviously listening to your podcast, but what are some other ways?
Of course, listening to my podcast is the number one. No, the first thing is really going inside ourselves and taking a real look at yourself in a loving way, in a forgiving way, in a non-judgmental way, and asking those difficult questions and just really aligning with, in a practical way. I also really recommend starting to meditate, if not already meditating, and doing an exercise. I have a free one on my website on consciousaccelerator.com in the tips section, and just aligning with your values and understanding what they are, because you can use your values as a filter for everything that you do, for every decision you make. But we all have our own unique journeys and paths towards going conscious. But I really think it's about firstly turning inwards, giving yourself the space and time for that process, whether that be meditation or journaling or both or other modalities, and also surrender as well, and starting to shed those fears that we have and surrender to your true journey and intuition. So that's where I would start, and where I've seen patterns where the people that I've spoken to about their journeys have also started in some way. Sometimes you're forced to, sometimes it feels like it was your decision, but I think we all have to go inwards first.
When a person is listening to their intuition, or when you are, what does that look, feel, and sound like?
I love this question. I'm so fascinated by the topic of intuition because no one fully understands it. No scientist, no philosopher, no one can fully describe what intuition actually is and where it comes from, which I find so magical. Intuition is, for me, a knowing, and it's physical. It's in my gut. It's grounded and rooted. And so often there's something there that we feel, and then the mind comes in with all the fears and chatters around, and it's very busy and a bit manic maybe. It's a completely different energy and frequency to the grounded feeling of the knowing and intuition.
That's super cool. Mine comes in differently. Mine comes in as like this very direct voice. It's like, you must do this. I was like, okay.
Yeah.
It's amazing. Yeah. So it's like everybody sort of has to figure out what theirs looks, feels, and sounds like. Nikki, what does the wisdom of the body mean to you?
To me, wisdom of the body means wisdom of the universe. Through my experiences, I'm starting to connect the body with the greater universe, whatever that might be for you, in more and more deep ways. And I'm starting to ask questions like, does my intuition come from my ancestors? Does my intuition come from a shared consciousness that we all have as a whole? And what direction is that growing in? And so I think that when we listen to the body, when we connect with the body, when we allow our body to guide us, we are untapping a completely different level of experience and knowledge and truth. Your intuition doesn't lie, your body doesn't lie. So wisdom is, what better word could there be paired with body?
Oh, Nikki, it's been so lovely being here with you today. And I am so excited about the work that you're doing in the world, because it's making the world a better place. It's making the world a more connected place. And so for people to learn about your Conscious Accelerator and your podcast, Going Conscious, how can they look you up?
Thank you so much, Heather, and right back at you. So you can find the Going Conscious podcast on any major podcast platform, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or you can go to the website, goingconscious.com, and click or listen from there. And I'm excited to be launching my episode with Heather very soon, where she's been on my podcast too. So I hope you'll enjoy that one. I'm sure you will. You can go to consciousaccelerator.com, and you can also find me on Instagram and Clubhouse at Nikki Trott.
Yeah. And just there may be a person listening right now who is, really resonating with this of like, I think I need to make a big shift, and reach out to Nikki. She'll guide you. Thanks for being here today, Nikki.
Thank you so much, Heather. It was such a pleasure. I could talk to you forever.
Me too. Thank you for tuning in and dropping in with us today. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. I really want to hear your feedback. To learn more about my work, visit heathergrish.com. That's Heather, GRZYCH.com. And meet me here next time on The Wisdom of the Body.